The courthouse clock struck 9:17 a.m. as Marcus Johnson stepped into courtroom 4 of the Fulton County District Court in Atlanta. His worn-out shoes echoed across the cold marble floor, each step carrying the silent resolve of someone who had long endured the weight of prejudiced stares. Marcus wore a simple suit, clearly rented, and though it was neatly pressed, it couldn't hide the signs of his daily struggles etched into his face. The furrowed brow, the determined eyes, the squared shoulders, despite the visible tension. He was an ordinary man, 34 years old, black, athletic build, his expression a mixture of dignity and exhaustion. That morning he wasn't just another defendant. He was a symbol, though he didn't know it yet. The heavy courtroom doors slammed shut behind him with a thud that seemed to announce the beginning of something inevitable. Marcus walked to the defense table alone, no lawyer by his side, carrying only a faded blue folder. As he approached, a murmur swept through the room, whispered comments poorly disguised among the spectators and even a few court officials. Judge Arthur Whitaker, a white man in his 60s known for his stern demeanor and cutting remarks, peered over his glasses at Marcus with a look of clear disdain. "You're without an attorney?" he asked, his deep voice resonating through the courtroom. Marcus nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I've chosen to represent myself." For a brief moment, the courtroom fell silent. Then, a stifled chuckle broke out from the back row. Judge Whitaker crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "You believe that, with no legal training, you can argue your case better than a lawyer," he said with a crooked smile. Marcus remained steady. "I believe no one will defend my truth better than I can, Your Honor." Though respectful, his reply seemed to irk the judge, who let out a loud sigh. Turning to the audience with exaggerated patience, the judge slowly shook his head, drawing a few more, barely hidden laughs from the crowd. "Very well, Mr. Johnson. I presume you've at least spent the weekend studying a basic law manual, haven't you?" This time, several people laughed openly. Marcus clenched his fist on the defense table, not out of fear, but from the controlled anger simmering beneath his skin. This was public humiliation, carefully orchestrated, and he was the main target. The judge, seizing the tension, went on, "Let's move this along. After all, we all have more important things to do than watch an amateur performance, don't we?" His words hung heavily in the air. But Marcus kept his gaze locked on the judge, unshaken. His mother had taught him long ago that a man's dignity isn't measured by the approval of others, but by how firmly he stands in his own truth. He knew what was at stake. The courtroom was against him, the system was against him, and in that moment, even time itself seemed eager to rush him to defeat. But Marcus carried something no one else in. That room could see, not yet. As Judge Whitaker shuffled his papers, readying himself for what he expected to be a short and humiliating hearing, Marcus took a deep breath. Humiliation wouldn't break him. On the contrary, it only fueled the fire burning in his chest. The fire of justice. The court didn't know it yet, but it was about to witness something that would forever change the way they looked at him, and at many others who, like Marcus, had never been given a fair chance. Because while the room filled with laughter and scorn, Marcus held in that faded blue folder an argument so carefully crafted, so surgically precise, that in just a few minutes, a heavy silence would fall over those marble walls. And then, the real trial would begin. To understand the quiet courage Marcus Johnson carried that morning, you had to look back to the forgotten streets of West Atlanta where he grew up. Among cracked concrete alleys and rusted lampposts, Marcus learned early on that life, for many, wasn't a paved road, but a twisted trail full of invisible traps. Born on a stifling summer afternoon, Marcus was the third child of a single mother, Angela Johnson, a woman of unbreakable spirit who raised her children with dignity despite everything they lacked. She often told him, "The color of your skin will make people judge you before they even hear your voice. So when they speak about you, make sure they say you never bowed your head to anyone." Those words rooted themselves in Marcus's soul as both prayer and promise. During his childhood, old books salvaged from public libraries fed his curious mind. While other boys dreamed of becoming basketball stars or rappers, Marcus dreamed of something else: to be heard, understood, respected. He devoured stories about forgotten heroes, lawyers who fought against unjust systems, leaders who changed the course of history with the power of their ideas. Still, the road was merciless. At 17, Marcus watched his best friend Deshaun get wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit, a victim of a system that saw black skin as a threat rather than a citizen's birthright. It was in that same courtroom, under the same cold fluorescent lights, and before the same indifferent eyes, that Marcus made a vow to himself. He would never allow himself to be silenced. Without the means to attend college, he worked as a delivery driver by day and a janitor at a public school by night. Every penny he could save went toward second-hand law, books, which he devoured during countless sleepless nights. It was that almost brutal self-discipline that brought him to this courtroom, face to face with Judge Whitaker. Marcus understood that the law, with all its cold, technical language, could also be a powerful weapon in the right hands. And though underestimated, he had prepared for this moment like a soldier preparing for battle. In the week leading up to the trial, he spent entire nights studying similar cases, reviewing the Constitution, analyzing state and federal laws. He even memorized entire passages from landmark rulings, anticipating every possible attack, every trap. But what he carried wasn't just knowledge. It was the pain of generations before him, the invisible weight of suspicion etched into his skin, the hunger for justice that even the hunger for bread could not tame. That morning, when he entered the courtroom with his faded blue folder, he didn't just carry sheets of paper. He carried centuries of struggle, translated into arguments both meticulously calculated and emotionally undeniable. While the judge and the spectators laughed at him, Marcus quietly recalled all the times he had been ignored in stores, followed around in supermarkets, dismissed in job interviews. Every humiliation had become a brick in the fortress he had built inside himself. He wasn't just fighting to win his own case. Marcus wanted to prove that dignity and intelligence have no color. And in that courtroom, where every glance aimed at him was laced with prejudice, he wasn't merely preparing to defend himself. He was preparing to make history. Because what no one knew, and what Judge Whitaker, in his arrogance, couldn't even imagine, was that Marcus had crafted an argument so sharp, so devastating that it wouldn't just change the course of that hearing. It would silence every voice that dared to doubt him that morning. The silence that was coming would be the most powerful speech ever delivered. And Marcus was ready. The courtroom, thick with the constant murmur of disparaging remarks, seemed to have already convicted Marcus Johnson before he could utter a single argument. It wasn't just Judge Whitaker. It was the entire atmosphere, saturated with the collective belief that Marcus didn't belong there. The judge flipped through the papers before him with exaggerated slowness, like a director setting the stage for a public humiliation. He adjusted his glasses on his nose and, without looking, directly at Marcus, spoke with heavy irony. "Mr. Johnson, the court grants you the floor, but please be brief. We wouldn't want to waste the precious time of this court." The audience smiled. Some even coughed to stifle their laughter. Marcus, maintaining his steady posture, stood up, opened his blue folder and pulled out a carefully folded sheet of paper. He approached the podium. His face was calm, but his eyes, locked intensely on the judge, burned with restrained force. "Your Honor, before presenting my defense, I would like to formally object to the conduct of this proceeding." The room snapped into a brief, startled silence. The judge raised an eyebrow, as if he had just heard a child tell a joke. "Objection?" he repeated, a sarcastic smile tugging at his lips. "You've barely begun and already you're here to teach this court how to operate?" He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and continued. "Very well, Mr. Johnson. Proceed. We could all stand to learn something new. Today." The mockery was blatant. It was a power play, and Whitaker made it clear who he thought was in charge. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. I would like to formally state for the record that I was denied full access to the evidence presented by the prosecution and that I was not properly informed of my rights, as stipulated under the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. The courtroom once again fell silent. The judge's brow furrowed for just a brief, nearly imperceptible moment before he quickly recovered his mocking tone. Mr. Johnson, your superficial reading of the Constitution is quite charming, but this court has operated well within legal parameters. You, however, lacking any formal legal training, may not grasp the nuances that take trained attorneys years to master. He paused, letting his words hang in the air like slow-acting poison. Now, unless you wish to drag this amateur performance out even longer, I suggest you stick to defending yourself against the charges. This court is not a classroom for theoretical debates. It was a low blow, calculated to intimidate, belittle, and humiliate Marcus in front of everyone. And it might have worked on anyone else. Marcus slowly lowered the sheet of paper and looked around the room. He saw faces staring back at him with pity, disdain, or simple curiosity. He knew that, at that moment, his image was being shaped in their minds. Just another black man foolish enough to challenge a system never meant to welcome him. Judge Whitaker seized the pause and, with the coldness of an executioner, added, "By the way, Mr. Johnson, if at any point you wish to reconsider and request a public defender, someone who actually understands the law, this court can still arrange that. There's still time to avoid complete humiliation." This time some laughed openly. The humiliation was public, deliberate, and cruel. But Marcus smiled. Not a wide smile, not a smile meant to please. It was a faint flicker, at the corners of his mouth almost imperceptible, yet loaded with silent certainty. "I appreciate the offer, Your Honor, but I will proceed. With the court's permission, I would like to begin presenting my defense." The judge waved his hand dismissively. "Very well. Just make it quick." Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Every sneer, every provocation, every calculated humiliation had only served to make the impact that much more devastating. Inside that blue folder rested a defense that would not only dismantle the charges against him, but also expose serious procedural violations committed by the prosecution, and, in doing so, directly challenge the conduct of Judge Whitaker himself. Whitaker's dirty game was about to meet its antidote, and the courtroom, so eager to witness Marcus's downfall, had no idea what it was about to see, because the real show hadn't even started yet, and when it did, there would be no more laughter, only silence. Marcus Johnson approached the podium slowly, the sheet of paper held firmly between his fingers. The room seemed suspended in expectation, though no one, not even Judge Whitaker, was prepared for what was about to happen. Marcus calmly adjusted the microphone and, in a clear, steady voice, began. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen present, my defense begins with a very simple question. If the law is meant for everyone, why doesn't everyone have equal access to it?" The courtroom fell, silent. Some furrowed their brows, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The phrase, though simple, carried a weight none of the judge's earlier words had managed to summon. Marcus didn't glance at the audience. His eyes stayed locked on Judge Whitaker. "I have been charged with resisting authority during a police stop. However, in my possession is the full video of that encounter, which was omitted from the documentation provided by the prosecution." He pulled a small flash drive from his folder and held it up. "I request that this video be shown now, in the name of the truth and the justice this court claims to uphold." Judge Whitaker, visibly irritated, struggled to maintain control. "Mr. Johnson, this court is under no obligation to consider evidence not formally submitted into the record." Marcus had anticipated this. Without missing a beat, he replied, "With all due respect, Your Honor, under Georgia's Criminal Procedure Code, Section 17(8)(1), any evidence that could prove the defendant's innocence must be considered regardless of its origin, as long as it is legitimate." To deny this right would violate my constitutional guarantee to a fair trial. Silence crashed down over the room. For a fleeting moment, the judge seemed unsettled. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and cast a quick, uneasy glance at the prosecutor, who looked away. Knowing he had opened a door that could not be shut, Judge Whitaker, with visible reluctance, sighed. "Very well. The video will be played." An officer quickly plugged in the flash drive, and the footage appeared on a large side screen. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the recording began. The video showed Marcus on a quiet street, approached by two police officers. The footage was clear. Marcus, calm and respectful, repeatedly asked the reason for the stop. No answer was given. Instead, he was verbally assaulted, shoved, and handcuffed without cause. The room watched in absolute silence. When the video ended, there was no doubt left. What the prosecution had labeled resisting was, in truth, the peaceful attempt of a citizen demanding his rights. Marcus seized the moment. "Your Honor, based on this video, and the fact that this evidence was deliberately withheld by the prosecution, I move for immediate dismissal of the charges on grounds of lack of merit and violation of my constitutional right to a fair trial." Marcus's voice, still calm, seemed to thunder against the courtroom walls. Judge Whitaker, his face now slightly flushed, nervously shuffled through papers on his bench. There was no maneuvering around the obvious without further exposing his own bias. The audience, once mocking, now watched in near reverent silence. For a moment that felt eternal, the entire courtroom remained still. Finally, the judge leaned back in his chair, locked eyes with Marcus, and muttered, "This court will recess to review the newly presented evidence." It was an unspoken surrender. Marcus knew it, and everyone there knew it too. He hadn't just defended his innocence, he had exposed the injustice of a system that all too often presumed guilt instead of demanding proof. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with the unbreakable force of truth and preparation. As the judge announced the recess, Marcus remained standing, not in defiance, but in respect, for himself and for the countless others, invisible in that courtroom, silently rooting for his victory. What Marcus didn't know was that the impact of that moment would reach far beyond those courtroom walls. Because outside, someone had recorded every second of what had just happened. And soon, the whole world would know the name, Marcus Johnson. The courtroom had changed. When Marcus Johnson returned after the recess, the atmosphere no longer carried the same undercurrent of silent disdain. The audience, once filled with whispers and laughter, now watched him with a mix of respect and quiet shame. Judge Whitaker, for his part, seemed to have aged years during the short break. His gestures, once firm and commanding, were now mechanical, as if every movement weighed heavily on him. Without looking directly at Marcus, the judge cleared his throat and announced in a dry voice, "This court hereby orders the immediate dismissal of all charges against the defendant, Marcus Johnson, due to lack of evidence and violation of his constitutional rights. Mr. Johnson is free to go." For a moment, absolute silence. Then, unexpectedly, a woman in the front row began to clap. 1, 2, 3 hesitant claps, until the entire courtroom, one by one, gave in to the moment. The sound of applause filled the room. Marcus stood there, feeling a knot form in his throat. Not because he had defeated the charges, but because of the invisible weight that finally seemed to lift, if only for a moment. It wasn't just for him. It was for every young person who had been dismissed, for every mother who had cried over unanswered. Injustice for every man and woman who still believed in the possibility of a better system. He looked around and saw faces filled with emotion, teary eyes, expressions of shame and admiration, and then his gaze fell again on Judge Whitaker. Behind the mask of coldness, Marcus saw for just a second the bitter flicker of defeat. But he didn't celebrate. True justice doesn't take satisfaction in humiliating the oppressor. It finds its fulfillment in restoring the dignity of those who have been trampled. Without saying a word, Marcus closed his blue folder. the same one that had carried all his hopes and arguments, and walked slowly toward the exit. Before crossing the threshold, he stopped, turned back to face the courtroom, and said in a firm voice, "Justice is not a favor. It's a right. And when those entrusted with upholding it fail, it's up to us to remind them who the law truly serves." There was another moment of silence, but this time it wasn't filled with contempt. It was filled with respect. Marcus left the courtroom with his head held high under the watchful eyes of everyone there. Hours later, the video of his defense spread across social media. Millions of views within hours. Headlines read, "Man defends himself and dismantles unjust accusation. Court falls silent before the courage of an ordinary citizen. Justice, a necessary reminder." The name Marcus Johnson echoed far beyond the cold walls of that courtroom, and with it, a clear message. Some courage of one can inspire change for many. How often does society judge based on appearances before even hearing a voice? How many voices are silenced, not for lack of reason, but because there's no willingness to listen? Marcus Johnson isn't just a character. He's a real reflection of a silent battle that plays out every day in the forgotten corridors of justice. Dignity, courage, and truth are more powerful weapons than any prejudice. Never underestimate the power of someone who knows their rights.